So, Susanna and David, it is great to have you here, so to speak. This is going to be a lot of fun, I think. Susanne Marie and David Buckland, good friends and good friends with each other. And this informal conversation, I think, is going to um, be a great joy to just express whatever is expressing through each of you and maybe me a little bit. Susanna, your website is susannamarie.org.
Yeah.
David, your website is davidya.ca. That's Davidya.ca. And most, if not everyone who sees this is going to have gone either to one or the other of your websites and seen some sort of link to a YouTube video. And so that's how this is being presented. And the genesis of this was that Susanna had mentioned to a group of friends that it was just about exactly 8 years ago that Susanna, you had this wonderful conversation with Adyashanti, hosted by Rick Archer, and it's one of the interviews on Rick's website, batgap.com. You also have a link to that on your website. David, you have a link to it because on your website, which is mostly blog posts, have an article about that. So this was back in 2016, and there was a bit of interaction between the two of you about having a chat, which you did, and then that led to the thought of having another chat, but putting it up so that people could see and hear what you have to say. So that's kind of where we're going with this. And to get started, I think we just go to you, Susanna, because it was in a way initiated by you, and just talk a little bit about what your experience was as to what you refer to as the no self shift, and we'll go from there.
Great. Happy to be here with the two of you. Um, well, I love how there is this conversation taking place 8 years after that shift, and actually a little over 8 years. The conversation was 8 years ago, I think, with Adya, and it was so dramatic for me. And I was in what people and the two of you, I think, understand and is called unity consciousness. So I was in this unity phase for about 9 years at that point. And in the unity phase, the way that I see it is that the heart wakes up to itself. And the unconditional heart, the radiant heart that is welcoming and allowing for all that it sees, all that's arising, because it knows it as itself. So it's everything that it encounters within and everything that it encounters without and sees. It knows it as itself. It's one with everything. And so being one, it's inclusive. It's all embracing. So during those 9 years, there was just a lot of embodiment, what I call embodiment, what many people do. And that is just this inner reconciliation period of everything that felt like it was living in separation, things that had, personality traits, beliefs, pain body experiences that had been misconstrued, that were living here, that wanted to be um, understood from the point of view of love, really, from inclusivity. So it helped heal a lot. There was a long process of healing and harmonizing and a cleaning up period, really, I mean, I was not like I was a mess in any way, but there was just the leftover stuff there.
Yeah.
Had been on a long journey of spirituality and trying to be, good with my communications and all that, but it just got, everything became more refined. It was a time of refinement, really. And it was a wonderful time because the refinement was happening with a celebration of love. Like, oh, this too. I had this kind of mantra that some people who know my work, I would say, this too is it. This too. This too. And over time, I have to say that the unity phase kind of thinned out in terms of being able to really reflect on the fact I was in unity. It becomes so normalized. And so to the very point where I couldn't even tell, it was just so, oneness was so
Pervasive?
integrated,
Hmm.
integrated that I couldn't really tell that there was oneness anymore. It was because that's the way all of these shifts happen, is that at first there may be, if it's a big shift, a big wowzy, right?
Yeah.
Um, like look at this, wow, aha, a major change in dimensional and in thinking and perceiving, perception
Yeah,
shift.
big contrast.
The contrast
Yeah.
exactly is
Yeah.
big. Well, and when it becomes integrated, it's just the norm. It's the new norm. This is how you're living. This is you're at another floor in the elevator. Let's not talk about hierarchy, higher or lower, but you're just at a different floor. The door opens up and you walk out, and at first it's wow, and then it's like that's your landscape.
Yes.
So the reason I'm bringing all this up is because that for me, that landscape of integrating and harmonizing and embracing and seeing through and understanding what um, non-dual awareness really is, which is this oneness. Um, that it led to another shift, another landscape. And I wasn't anticipating it. Um, so what took place for me is I was on a personal retreat and along the coast of Northern California, and I was grappling and working with something that was hard for me because what happened is I had environmental illness from a place I was living, and I couldn't live there anymore. And my daughter, who was 16 at the time, I wasn't able to house her, so she was staying with her father. We were separated. And I just felt this hmm, kind of like an existential kind of encounter of like, I cannot make, it wasn't just existential, but it was just this understanding that I could not fix this problem in my normal ordinary ways because housing was challenging to find in Northern California at the time, and things it was just kind of dragging on the situation, staying at friend's house, so on and so forth. And I was sick. So the way that I was in process with being in unity was just to meet it, just meet it, meet it,
Mhm.
meet it, be with it. And it was a tough one. And so I was kind of doing this Rubik's Cube. You know how when like you're trying to find an answer, and but when you can't, something can spring loose. So there was just this like like how do you figure this out? And every direction, even how do you figure it out with releasing it in the normal way that I was used to, which was to meet it. That wasn't even doing the trick. So all my little tricks that I didn't even know I was using as tricks wasn't working. Um, so I was taking a walk in this beautiful nature on, you know, really vast, beautiful country. And I took a look at this tree that had fallen in an old oak, several hundred years old. And I was just looking at it. And the way that I had been looking at things while in unity, and I had gotten so used to it, was that was one with it. So when you I just merge and be one with it, the cells, the experience, tree and I one, kind of thing.
Yes.
But
Yeah,
it
that
was so,
energy transmission exchange that happens
yes,
there.
and so
Yeah,
integrated at that
yeah,
point. It was just like, well, because I was like working with this kind of and David is probably in agreement because of what we were talking about, and before, is that it was like a gut kind of, the gut is the location where we have this kind of existential kind of, you know, relationship to life. Is it
Yes.
safe? Are we trying to maintain control? Because I was, that was up for me. I didn't have control. I didn't feel so safe. But it's like I had worked on so much by then. It was just a surprise that there was still something maybe there.
Yes.
So, oh, and I want to say, and I'm not going to go into it because I don't want to hog up the whole space, but I want to say that I'd had a mind awakening to itself before. That was the first awakening, then heart,
Yes.
and now it was going here.
Right.
And I was a mother, so I've heard many, teachers say that for people who are parents, that can hang on for a long time, the existential piece, because you need to, stay here in some way for the good of these children, right? So it's harder to let go. And so there was this kind of like not kind of, there was a huge thing that happened right then. And it was just kind of like something broke, something cracked. And I swear, I felt like I had suddenly taken like 1,000 hits of acid or something. It was just so big. I'm not an acid person, but I was like, I was one way of perceiving reality, which had already been integrated, I said, into oneness. And suddenly it was completely different. And
Yeah.
it was, instead of this kind of oneness, it became just, there was no landing place. And it felt like I just was this slippery something, and everything I looked at, there was no more landing on it. And because I discovered much later through trying to figure this out, what just happened is that oneness was still a landing place. It was still a place that self, whether even if it's the divine center versus the personal self, the divine self was still had an ability to perceive itself as unity. So that fell away, and I walked back, and I was just laid down. And I thought, I wonder if this hemp oil that I'm using for pain is making me really high. Of course it wasn't, but I was just trying to figure out what the heck.
Yeah.
I
Or
know
words to that effect.
nothing. Okay. And then I'll fast forward. So in that moment, what remained since then, okay, is that I cannot process anymore in the same way. So with unity, I was able to, so that consciousness that was the heart, or the oneness consciousness, was able to be in process with something that was taking place. And that's why harmonization was taking place, because there was a process.
Yes.
And all that disappeared in that moment. So how I had known myself, right, was gone. The way that I perceived oneness was out the window. Um, and it wasn't like there was two-ness at all. It was just this ongoing no landing, and I didn't know if I could drive. It took me a while to figure out again how to bring a fork to my mouth. Like, it was just like until the functioning got on board, and it was like, hey, functioning can still happen. The any remnant of needing to reflect on what's happening in order to make it happen was out the window. So that's why I say that the like that self-reflective mechanism of mind that bends on itself to see itself even as a unity, even within the divine center, seeing itself as that, it was cut. And so there was no more self-reflection.
Yeah.
And that it took me about 2 years to integrate it. That's a long time.
Yeah.
That's a long time. After I figured out I could still drive, felt sorry for the people on the road. After I figured out that I could go, after I told a friend or two, don't let anyone put me away. I'm not crazy just because I can't figure out how to eat right now or something. And so then I had a conversation with Adya on the phone about it, Adya Shanti. And that's why we decided to do this talk between us, because there was this thought that, well, this might be happening to others or could happen to more people, and let's include it in the map that's not as common as a discussion. And then I reviewed Bernadette Roberts. I had I had to sift through it because I'm not a Christian background. I don't have a Christian background. So unusual. As a Western person, white person. Anyway, but sifting through it, her books on no self and the falling away of the Unity Center were actually really, really, really similar. And I felt so relieved to just have similar language with somebody, even though her experience was more like she was more upset because when that Unity Center fell away for her, it wasn't just how she had known herself, it was how it was she had investment in being connected to the divine in that way.
Yes.
And I didn't. Of course, it was such a challenge. It was like being put on another planet, literally, and having to
Yeah.
relearn how to do stuff. Um, so so then I had the conversation with Adya, with Rick, and I wish in some ways, we had gone more into the experiential aspect of it at the time because, now we're 9 years later for me, we're 8.5 years, let's say. And so that it's hard to retrieve the exact experiential memory of that time. I can tell
Yeah.
you that because now it's become integrated, just like the unity and just like the
Right.
awakening to mind had been
Yeah.
integrated. Uh, and I just want to say one final thing about this part is no self. It's not the same no self that so many, it's like I think that when someone uses the word no self, anyone listening to this, it's like it really needs to be examined. What is it that you mean by no self? Is it the first awakening of empty mind, seeing that everything's empty at its core? Is there that you can't find a person? Is that Buddhist no self? And what do you think that means? So this is a translation and interpretation of no self that actually Adya and Bernadette Roberts and we share. And I'm not saying we're the only ones, but that's the pointer.
Yeah. It's like a no cosmic self or no
Okay, so
universal
yeah,
self.
you tell me what you
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean,
But first,
it's
before
an
we go
important.
on, do you have anything to say, John?
Well, I was just going to say, first of all, that yeah, that brings up terminology, and it's going to, even though we want to stay with experiential here, there's going to have to be a little bit of talk there, and I think that no self is one of those things that we need to, just it is different for different people and all,
Mhm.
and then the other part of that is the backgrounds that we have,
Mhm.
and that's where people would be talking about one concept or another too, and it may turn out to be the same thing. So that, for example, David and I both have transcendental meditation backgrounds,
Mhm.
and so we have a model that was presented to us. And David's book, which is a wonderful resource, is
It is.
there certainly is a kind of an extension, for one of a better way to put it, from that initial model into much more in the later stages. So that said, why don't we segue to your comments, David, about what Susanna has said and your own experience?
Okay. Yeah. What I found most interesting about that conversation with Aja was um, his when I was in the process post awakening, I was approaching unity, but it wasn't quite there yet. And I saw this conversation that Aja had with Locke Kelly about the journey. It's called the journey after awakening, basically the process between an initial awakening and and the unity shift. And they described it in some detail, different language than I was used to, but it was a really valuable perspective because I can see my process in it with a little bit different framing. And they talked about this idea of head, heart, and gut, as you mentioned, Susanne. Um, Essentially, the identification of the head, which goes with the initial awakening, the heart, and then the gut or core or existential identity. Those are also Mahamarmas in the energetic model, and so they're kind of core areas of identification. Most people think of this single ego identification, but I associated those with self-realization, what's called God consciousness, and unity, heart with God consciousness, and then gut with unity. And that's how Adyashanti had presented it, and that's how I experienced it here. And so I was surprised when we had our conversation earlier at the Science and Non-Duality Conference, and you had it a little later, and I could kind of had tied them together, that the gut release happened and then unity could unfold. But it turns out the energetic process is more variable, and actually now I'm seeing it's more common to happen later on, and quite often it happens, like in your case with the Brahman shift, and it sort of that changes the experience. Like in your case, the Brahman shift was more dramatic in certain ways because there was the release of that core identity and the Brahman shift together.
Who are you speaking to now?
Right.
To me?
To you, yeah.
To me. So
Yeah.
so can you explain what you mean by Brahman shift?
Or the no self, the shift
Ah,
beyond the sense of cosmic self or capital S self. Because in unity, there's this process of progressive recognition that is the self and that is myself, and that is conscious. That is what I am. This is the same, and it's this very intimate kind of experience. And we're kind of going through this process of experiencing and becoming in that kind of sense. The Brahma Sutra calls that the aggregate. It's kind of this growing aggregate of being, and it's very intimate. And then with the Brahman shift, we transcend that. It's kind of like, in certain ways, like the initial awakening, when we fall out of the ego. With the Brahman shift, we fall out of the cosmic self and into a nothingness. They kind of get there's some language that gets confused in here too, because sometimes people have an initial awakening into a sense of emptiness, and so there can be a sense of egolessness or no self and emptiness. And then people are also using similar terms for the Brahman shift, and in a sense of a no self again, but a no capital S self, and and so on. So there's and oh yeah, I'm talking about emptiness, but emptiness is really a quality of space, and open consciousness has that quality of space, and so it can sometimes people experience that as being full, and sometimes as empty. And whereas with Brahman, it's not even emptiness; it's a nothingness. It's not, because there isn't even that quality of space, or whatever. But words are really challenging
Well,
because
so
they're
within that,
English
would
words.
you say that for yourself, David, that was maybe the sort of the for want of a better way to put it, the dominant characteristic of the Brahman / no self shift for
Yeah,
you? No
yeah. So
thingness.
for me, I had the unity shift on a retreat, and it came the core existential identity release came about 3 or 4 days earlier. Um, and I recognize it because of hearing the conversation. It wasn't particularly Germanic, but it was distinctive. And then there was no longer a sense of inside or outside. It was just one continuum. But the larger recognition hadn't quite happened yet. And then I went on a retreat, and it happened during the retreat. And there was actually, for me, there was a bit of a collapse. The sense of there kind of had been all this subtle experiential stuff that had unfolded, and it all fell away. And there was just this shift and couldn't really define what it was. It was actually, I remember it was at night, and so all the lights are off. My roommate was asleep, and I was sitting there and recognizing everything had disappeared. It was just here in the immediate experience, and something had changed, but I couldn't really figure out what it was at first. But it was like an amplification of what had been unfolding for about 10 days with the falling away of the existential self and all that. And and then the next day it became clear what it was. And actually, in this particular situation, I was we had the morning meeting, and I was helping people find their chairs or whatever. And the teacher came in and took one look at me and rearranged the room and had me sit up front and describe my experience, which was very challenging because it had just happened. I didn't really have words yet. But there was a bit of a joke of because of the sense of David had fallen away. And so I had started using, I didn't, personal pronouns didn't make any sense. So one of the guys there made a joke about the person formerly known as David. And, that was kind of a joke for a little time, but it kind of integrated after that. And although I did start using here as a personal pronoun, which my editor really didn't like at all. But yeah, so there was a different kind of a shift. And that kind of, there was that progressive expansion of that took place for me around about a 3-year period. And then I went down to the States in grad school, and I was in a large meditation hall doing group practice at the time. And for me, there had been a development of a personal relationship with the divine through the God consciousness period prior to, with the heart opening and that prior to unity, and then through unity, it was deepening. And so it was quite curious. I was in practice, and there was which is not normally when shifts happen, and there was a sense of transcending, going deeper within, but it was different than usual. And my personal form of God came forward and said, if you continue, our relationship will be over, which was kind of took me back, but it felt like the right thing to do. And this is also really weird that the process would stop and start again, but it felt right. So I stepped back into it, and kind of the bottom dropped out, and then sort of being the thing of being everything everywhere was gone. But at the time I was in this compressed graduate program, so I was, classes 6 days a week, and it was, long days and stuff like that. And so I had to be really focused on my studies. So there wasn't really a lot of time to sit with it and what is this here until I finished. And then I was able to sit with it more and go into it. But there was at first, there was a distinct sense of loss of that intimacy and connection with everything. And that I was more aware of what wasn't there anymore than what was now there. Although there is the wrong word, but it's not a something. but there's as I was able to sit with it and that it deepened, and I became more aware of what was there. And it's not, see, with unity, it's consciousness is knowing all this stuff. Whereas with Brahman, it's Brahman. We come to know Brahman, and it's Brahman that knows Brahman. And it's more subtle. So sometimes there can be a little bit of a pause before you become aware of what is there that wasn't there before. Well, no, it wasn't. It was there, but it wasn't aware. Even aware is the wrong word. There's a kind of quality of alertness that's in there, this divine quality of alertness that allows Brahman to know itself. But it's not really consciousness it's not experienced, because there isn't a process of experience when you're pre-consciousness. Um, so it's very hard to describe or put into
Mm-hmm.
words.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the thing about that is that, so the descriptions that each of you has provided here, there is, of course, some similarity, and
Yeah,
there's considerable difference too, in part because of terminology. So that, for example, you and I, David, would refer to Brahman, and as you say, it is Brahman that knows Brahman, and
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of experientially true. And yet, for someone who doesn't have that same background and wouldn't use the word Brahman, um, I suppose the rhetorical question would be: is it no self with a capital S that knows no self at that point, or is there even that same? There's a sense of knowingness that's there somewhere, or maybe not anywhere, but it sort of exists. That's not the mind. Um, so I guess maybe coming back to you, Susanna, for a second, if I'm using any terminology here, whether it's a knowingness or something, where it's not the mind that knows it at this point, would you agree with that? But that there's a kind of a knowingness nevertheless?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I mean, you're really nailing it with this point and what we share, what David and I are expressing that has a similarity. By the way, David, what you said at, in that last part of after you're able to, you know, whatever, take a look as if there was a take a look, that what, how you expressed it is I can see, I understand that part about experiencing itself without the consciousness of it, consciousness experiencing unity gone, it goes away. And then there's just pure experiencing, really. So for me, it's just been pure experiencing since that no self shift. And I actually don't even, I wish I could just use a different word than no self anyway, because it's so misconstrued. There are
Yeah.
people right now who are saying that they're in no self. And there's even a teacher out there who's kind of well known, who's saying that they can bring people to this no self. I'm like, well, you can't bring someone to this. So that can't be the same no self. So I almost wish that I could just, say, that's why I kind of break it down and go, oh, the self-reflective quality of mind. There's my dog. Self-reflective quality of mind ended. So this is just maybe the where either linguistics or totally different experiences where might want to tease it out.
Yeah.
And so yes, it's just pure experiencing. There's no knower of it for me. There's
right.
there's no I wouldn't even want to say there's knowing because it's just that's too much because there just isn't. There's no feeling of it being anything but just pure reality, just what is, just basically what is always ising itself all the time with no ability to reflect on it, meaning can't make something out of it. And it's not just reflecting on it, it's reflecting on anything, like all process, of course. So it's more like process, of course, continues to happen. You can't say that process stops because there's all kinds of process. There's body process happening, there's time is moving, there's aging, whatever process is happening, there's
Yeah.
location changes. It's like there's environment, and the body and mind are in that experience of meeting the new environment. So there's something that is aware of process, but it's not in process like it was before this shift, okay?
like
And
prior to.
so yeah, so that process before was as I said, it was a unity time, of like a feeling would emerge, there'd be a sensation or a feeling, and there would be a curiosity. And I got it down, like I became very fluid in my inner language of meeting experience and adept at it. And meeting it to the point where it would harmonize, and it was just like it would integrate. And whenever that would happen, it was just it became automatic, sort of this automatic engagement with harmonizing the interior, and which helped, you know, clear out any debris and all that. All that just disappeared in the blink of an eye and has never returned. So I used to just love laying down and meditating, laying down on and just be in process about what was happening. It was this little love affair of the interior, really taking place, and there's no more of that. There's no more, zero, and it happens so dramatically. So there's so in terms of self-reflection, there's mind that can think about itself. There's a reflection on feeling. What is this feeling? And there's a reflection on the moment. There's reflection. That's called, that's what people do, and even in unity. But for me, all that stopped. There's no more reflection on what's taking place. And that's pretty dramatic. I can't tell you
Yeah.
what a dramatic shift that was for me. And even though it was that I was very quiet in my mind before this took place, because I don't have very much mind like activity anyway. I didn't have. So so that's just where I don't know. And if we're having the same kind of linguistics, I completely understand what you were saying about Brahman, David. That does feel to be the experience that took place. But then that self-reflective piece is it's I don't hear you saying that. And nobody I know
Right.
from the TM world that I am close to that are even, not just in TM, but just use that framework. I haven't heard anyone use that kind of reference about this.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. There are certainly some variations there.
Mm,
One of the things I found really distinctive after the shift was that there was the sense that not only is there nothing here, but there's never ever been a creation. It's never been created in the first place. It's not that it's an illusion, it's that it's never even existed. And and yet there it is. So he was standing there looking at this world that
mm,
has never been created, and yet there it is in perception.
mm,
That was a really odd part. I also noticed there was this collapse of subtle polarities. Like in Unity, there was this bringing together of a lot, but there was still, in retrospect, I realized there was still these very subtle polarities about existing, not existing, and conscious, not conscious, and that kind of thing. And those all collapsed. And even in some of the apparent paradoxes of Brahman, for Brahman itself, it's not a paradox. It kind of collapses these. Yeah, it's hard to describe, but it collapses this stuff together. Um, but yeah, it's interesting though. The processing part is kind of, yeah, it kind of shut down, but then came back again. I think it might be there's kind of what you might call laws of nature of different physiologies that different people have different kind of roles, and the way I kind of see it is that there's a whole bunch of different experiencers because reality wants to experience itself all these different ways. And so we intentionally all experience things a little differently. That's the way we're made. And there is that kind of those kind of laws of nature, however you want to describe that, in tendencies or natural processes. Like I used to have this idea that, I have a strong mind or intellect, I guess you could say. And I figured that I needed to get rid of that, that it should go away. But then I reflected on it and realized that even in the midst of profound experiences, the intellect can be in there discriminating, and that it was actually part of the nature here, and that wasn't going to go away. But other people will have a different nature, and some people are driven crazy by so they don't need all that information. It's that they like it simple.
Yeah, but there's a couple of thoughts that pop to mind with me, and one of which is that using the word mind, and I've now not only experienced but also sort of shared with others, and I think others say this too, because one of the concepts early on, especially before the initial awakening, is that the mind has to stop, and so people try to stop their minds. And of course, that is a complete exercise in utter futility to try to do that. And even the notion, if you will, of letting go or allowing is still an action, right? And so then we, one way or another, it's Mother Nature, the laws of nature that sort of just give a little thump to the noggin or something like that, and the mind will at some point or another at least relax, if not just right out let go, and and then things just kind of start to happen by themselves. But one thing that I've said that has helped, I think, others is that it's not that you uh, stop the mind and and sort of put it aside. It's that you just sort of recognize, even intellectually, that the mind is not the self, and it may be just initially an intellectual understanding, but also letting the mind do its thing, including come along for the ride. And that kind of idea, that you don't have to stop the chattering mind if you've got a chattering mind. Um, and that, I think, even going forward. So, the later, as you talk about it, whether it was some sort of conscious action to respond to your personal God, and or at least decide, for want of a better way to put it, yes, this is a kind of okay thing to do. Presumably at that point there would be what we might call the cosmic mind, kind of in that process. It's not just the little mind here that would even be remotely capable of kind of saying, okay, let's do it. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Talking to David, yeah.
Well, David, primarily David here on
Yeah,
that
yeah,
particular
yeah.
question.
No, there's certainly, like, as above, so below. There's certainly uh, what we experience on an individual basis can also be reflected on a cosmic or universal basis. So the principle of the intellect and mind and emotions and that kind of thing can be more, a collective or even universal. There's even what's been called the cosmic body, which is essentially the body of all bodies, um, up at the top of what I refer to as creation, where when the dynamics of consciousness, self-interacting dynamics of consciousness first happened. But that can get experienced at a certain point in the process. But it depends on what you're interested in. There's such a vast range between the surface of experience of the physical world and uh, universal consciousness, that there's all kinds of things that people might be interested in exploring, and endless possibilities.
I have a question for you, David. What is your experience of, do you still feel like unity consciousness is some of the qualities of it, like healing and integration of the body, of the mind and body, of, you know, uh, things that the body contains? Do you feel like that's still taking place in your life? And even within this Brahman shift and all that, do you feel like that these reconciliations, inner reconciliations, still take place and harmonize within that? Because Yeah.
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 Well, there's kind of like there's a break and there's
For
an
you, for you, your
yeah,
experience.
yeah. For here there was a break and where that wasn't, and then it was kind of gradually a coming back again in the new context. It's kind of like with each major shift, there can be a complete falling away of the old. The new comes in, and then the old can come back again in the new context.
Uh,
But and usually with a more, well, it depends on what it is, but some of it comes back in a lesser role. I mean, like one of the things I when I first woke up, I experienced a sense of ego death. But then later on, I realized that the ego was still there as a function. There was still uh, personality traits and opinions and things I like better than other things. And if I
mhm,
stub my toe, but it was no longer the center. It was just kind of there, like I have a little finger. There's this function that distinguishes this is my foot and that's the floor, and this is the knife and that's my finger. And so there was that kind of function was still there, but it was no longer the center of who I was, which it had been before that. So there can be that kind of process of the new integrating the new and then bringing the old back into the new
mhm,
um, in the new context. And some of the old stuff will fall away in that process, and
mhm,
some of it will need to be relooked at again. Like I remember classically, we had studied about the stages of enlightenment and in a certain context, and we heard various things that Maharishi had said about what it looks like and what happens and stuff, and develop all these concepts about it. And
mhm,
when I actually woke up, was nothing like I expected. So I didn't even know what it was. Even, my shift was very clear, very distinct, but what it was, I had no idea because it didn't meet any of those concepts I had of it.
mhm,
So there was a going back and looking at that stuff again, and now realizing that, yeah, what he said was right. I just kind of added a layer of garbage to it that
mhm.
expectation that it would be a certain way, and it was nothing to do with that. So that those parts had to fall away in that process.
So, Susanna, do you, you asked the question, but how about you? In that, I mean, it's for sure here, here. The unity is in many ways still very much there, and the even sort of you could say earlier qualities are still very much there, or maybe not there, the right word, available might be the way that I would put it.
Mhm.
But how about for you?
Well, I think that the previous the openings and dimensional shifts, they are still included. It's included within the the what is now here. And so but there's not a revisiting. It's more like I can kind of remember that. It's like, those nesting dolls.
Yeah,
Yeah,
It
yeah.
exists within the whole. Um,
it's
but
curious though, because I remember after I first woke up, I couldn't remember what it was like to not be awake because that was
yeah.
just no longer there. And I
Yeah.
remember I was thinking about this. I was strolling down the street, going over to a friend's place, and this guy walked by me going the other direction, who was a little drunk and angry. And I was like, oh yeah, that's what it is. And I couldn't find it. There was no reference for what that was. But then I saw this guy, and I was like, oh yeah, there it is. And and so it's not like I can go back into the experience of unity. It's just those aspects of what came of that are still there, I guess you could say.
Hmm. Hmm. And it sounds like there's a little difference also just in terms of the time that what it meant, what it did, that unity time. Like for me, it was a long period, right? 9 years.
But you also
Um,
talked about a lot of unpacking in there, which that
yeah,
didn't happen here so much. I mean, there was some of it, but
yeah.
and and that gut release was relatively quick here. And so what I'm finding now, and we talked about this before, when I'm doing a lot of that processing now, like I got kind of pushed into studying somatic therapy this year and
Yeah.
have been doing a lot of work where the practice before had cleared off a lot of the reactivity, the emotional charges and stuff like that, that had cleared. And so I thought, that a lot of that was done. But
Yeah.
it turned out there were still a lot of impressions in the soma, so to speak, in the body,
Sure.
that were still unaddressed. This old ancestral stuff, past life stuff, uh,
Yeah.
precognitive childhood stuff, angry teen stuff,
Yeah. 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 That's the part that's interesting to me is how varied this is,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that's maybe hopefully helpful to anyone listening,
yeah,
that we have different experiences here, and yet the map can be sort of similar. And, for me, the unity period was all about the it was all about process and reconciliation and harmonization. Before that, I had done since my early 20s a lot of yoga, a lot of meditation, a lot of body work. So I was already working at releasing stuff in the body. Um, we're talking years.
yeah,
And then in unity, it just became the everything else that was left. And then since then, it's not like, one can say one is, that all that is over per se, but there's no more awareness of it. There's no more awareness of this is what I'm working on. There's just the moment to moment experience of what's taking place and no more. And I think that's what happened for me with the self-reflective quality when it fell away. I really feel like it's a mind thing. I think it's actually like some capacity in mind to bend on itself, to look at itself and to be in process stopped. So I can't, so it's like all that. I think that it came for me, it came because so much had already been cleared out and worked on. So that's my association, and maybe falsely, of with the unity time. For me, it's correct, but for others, my association of that time of unity, oh, that's the time of where this inner love affair of integration and process and release and just sort of harmonization takes place. Um and so for me, it's a interesting part of the conversation to hear that
yeah,
this is happening for you, the remainder of it, the
yeah,
remnants and the details, the fine details, which I think is great. I applaud you for doing that. I mean, I think that anyone who is taking awakening, and it's not you doing it, but to
right,
that degree, right? To that degree that's of course God. That's of course the divine taking it to that degree of wanting to make everything as possible, everything conscious to itself and not have anything remain behind, be left behind. It wants everything to be included and awoken to,
yeah,
basically.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's presumably that's divinity, kind of as you were getting at, David, wanting to the extent that there's a want, having this sort of impulse or inclination to know more and more and more, and to have different experiences through these different points, and to just kind of delight in the variety, of how that happens. Um, so that, and the other thing about all of this too, I think the perspective that both of you have, having had the shift a few years ago, now we are seeing it's people are popping all over the place. Still not that many, of course, but certainly the initial awakening and so forth. And there's more of that and more sharing, and in some cases happening very quickly. So, well, in my case, there's a lot of, I would say, overlap because of how quickly the different shifts happen. All those three major shifts happened within a year. So in some ways, there is still an unfolding and an overlap, like I say, that is going on that can be sort of discerned, felt, detected. Maybe that's why I say that there's sort of a in a way a kind of unity that is there and kind of available. And so for me, 2+ years ago, just walking in my neighborhood here in Southern California, just sort of experiencing just all of the connectedness and all of it just kind of coming in and coming in and suddenly just occurred to me. I stopped and I said, wait a minute, where is this witnessing separateness, something or another? What is this that's now suddenly kind of appeared, if you will? And I kind of thought about it, and what occurred to me in the immediate moment was along the lines of, well, all of the connectedness and everythingness and oneness still seems to be here, but there's no here. And as I kind of took it in, it's that the sort of infinite frame of reference or points of reference had all just ceased to be. And so there wasn't exactly a no thingness, and there wasn't exactly even a no self, at least in the way I kind of understand that. And yet there was. It was sort of all together and none at the same time, and no point of reference, no frame of reference. But the other thing about that is, because of having read, heard, seen people talk about the experiences, and there already having been a lot more than there were 6, 8, whatever number of years ago, there was a kind of recognition, as opposed to, oh no, what happens now kind of thing. And I suspect that even those, I mean, I've got a couple of friends who've had what we might call a very dry shift into no self or Brahman, where there really is just this nothingness and nothing to grab onto, and a discomfort with that. But even then, the couple of people that I can think of have at least kind of recognized it for what it is, and not been just frantic as someone could conceivably be if they just don't have any background or some sort of concept of it, if for want of a better way to put it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things too that's going on is because there's more and more people shifting, and this work has been done before, is the process gradually gets easier and not necessarily faster, but smoother, because the
Yeah.
kind of the way it gets cleared by other people going through the process, and a lot of this garbage we're processing is also somewhat collective. And so as people are working through their stuff, they're clearing those parts of the collective, which increases general clarity and so on like that. And so, just because it took, 50 years of meditation or whatever, for one generation doesn't mean that the people that are coming now are going to need to do the same degree of work. There's also the sense of that as consciousness rises in the collective, that the kinds of people being born are further along in itself as well. But there's a lot of variation in that kind of stuff too. Of course, it's not like we're going to go through this without any challenges, but
I'd like to just add also that not all awakenings are the same.
Yeah.
So one person may feel like they have an understanding of emptiness and it's this deep.
Yeah.
And I'm not making fun of it or diminishing it.
Right.
It is what it is. I don't know.
Still a
It's
profound
this deep
thing.
and this deep is this deep. It feels,
Yeah.
whatever it feels. And you don't know that there could be more. That's my point.
Right.
So emptiness. So you said earlier, David, as above, so below. I would say also as below, so above.
Yeah.
Okay, same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So however deep one goes into emptiness, the deconstructing reality to the point of really knowing that there is no center to anything, anything. And all meaning has been seen through. There is so much that can be bled out of reality to see, to really experience reality without any veils. So much to end up being pure experiencing. So, so as above, so below. Let's just say for simplicity's sake, understanding that above, let's say, is the emptiness, is the spirit, the transcendent. Let's just say above, okay?
Yeah.
And below would be form. Below would be content. Below would be body.
Yeah.
So however deep one is going in this understanding that everything internally and everything that you see and is that to the nth degree, that takes in my mind, that takes time.
Yeah.
That is something that is that for many it could be this deep. They see oneness. That means that as above, so below. So they'll see emptiness this deeply. Or let's say they go through a deep deconstruction for a good while, and they're have re- and the like 1 foot of I say for myself, for instance, that 1 foot of mine, one leg is in the unborn. It was just that happened at one point. It was just like the half of me was unborn permanently, and then half of me was in the born. But and they informed each other. The deeper that the understanding went that everything is that, the deeper that there was the understanding correspondingly of how far the unborn really is. So they were,
Yeah.
so there's, so, so coming back to, and not to diminish people's awakenings nowadays that might be, and not yours either, John, at all, in any way,
No,
because
no
I don't
worries.
know, and it's not for me to, and for anyone, it's not for me to, unless somebody sits with me and says, "Can you tell me? Let's go for it. Let's get in there and see what's happening." Because that's one of the things I do as my work, right?
Yes.
Is meeting people and seeing where they're at and helping them. But there is a difference for people who have been saturated with, and even over time, I was going to say, like time, like a fine wine. No, like over time, there's something to be said for the saturation. There's something to be said for content meeting itself. There's something to be said. And I agree with you, David, that part of that time could have been helping and I felt that during the unity time that, oh, this is collective, what I'm processing, what's being
Yes.
processed. This is collective. It just happened to be that the door that we shared a doorway. So my pain about something, let's just pick a piece of victimhood. Let's just say there was some victimhood about something. I'm just making something up here, but whatever.
Yeah.
It could be a doorway to a collective victimhood that, women
Yeah.
shared about being dismissed or something, not valued,
Yeah.
right? So let's say a piece of pain body or something that was being experienced here would be a doorway to a collective piece. And so there would be a healing on that level that may have helped the collective. That
Yes.
could be. That
Yeah.
could very well be. And but so my feeling is I really like the work of Sri Aurobindo.
Mm.
And Sri Aurobindo was about the saturation, really, if in my words, right, of consciousness of the divine, actually, the divine, of saturating form, no, in a conscious way, knowing that it is that, and bringing it down. He said, bringing this light down, the divine
Yes.
light down into the body. He was about planting it into the cells, into the whole body. And he helped pave the way for many of us, or people like him like that. So it wasn't just a transcendent awakening, it was an imminent awakening. It was
Yes.
imminent in here, so that knew itself as that. And my feeling is that there really is something to this, as above, so below. And it can feel complete when it's this deep, right? Don't we all know? I remember
Yes.
when
Oh,
it felt
hell
more
yeah. Sure.
complete,
Yeah.
but then it just gets the depth of it is the
And
capacity for. I mean, let me just finish saying this,
yeah. Sure.
and then is that the infant? We're talking about the infinite. We're
Right.
talking about the infinite being waking up to itself. It's not going to. It's going to. It's above as below is going to be infinite. Is my
Yes.
point.
And the breadth as well. Yeah. So there's the depth, more and more depth, and more breadth.
And more breath, right?
Yeah. And there's that refinement process. Is the word I use.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah.
But where where more and more of the detail can come out. So we have this kind of field of empty consciousness, and then that can all fill in with all the stuff of how consciousness becomes the world, and how different dynamics work, and it really depends on where we put our attention. Different people uh, spend more time, like say, so somebody has a healing role, they spend more time looking at the healing mechanism, and the refinement tends to happen more with attention, and so those areas fill out more, and we become more knowledgeable. Whereas somebody else
Yeah,
more fascination with some other area, and so that's where
yeah,
the detail fills out more. But yeah, I fully agree
absolutely.
on the divine. And it's interesting. The I refer to a para-Brahman stage, or pure divinity, where we become aware of that which is before even Brahman, and that is characterized by the divine, like a divine light flowing into the physiology. And I've become more aware there's kind of stages of that, more recently, and I think part of this, the calling for me to do this somatic work has been to open things up so that that can happen into a more physical level, because it's kind
Mm.
of come in on an energetic level, and it's had an effect on the energy physiology quite a lot, but it hasn't moved into the physical yet. And so there's some work I needed to do there to prepare for that. That's kind of how
Mm.
it's seeming to me now. That's in process.
Beautiful. Yeah. For me, the body has always been the main portal. Like that's just how I was wired, like we're all, you said you have the more the intellect piece, not that I don't have intellect, but you know what I mean. But the body, but we all have
Yeah,
these windows that are especially open,
yeah, yeah.
and rooms that are beloved, or comfortable or exercised from the past or whatever. But for me, I'm a sensing being from the get-go,
Okay,
from
yeah.
born as a sensing being and not so much a thinker, a thinking being. I was never a really thinking being. And I found out, maybe you guys know this, and it's kind of an odd thing to find out at a certain stage of one's life. I was already probably in my early 40s when I found out, and I had been, into meditation and yoga and all this stuff for a long time, even teaching for a while. And I thought I understood what people were saying when they said that they had a lot of thoughts and they had the monkey mind or whatever. I was just listening to it, because you don't know what you don't know, right? You just
Yeah.
don't know. Like you don't know a fruit that exists maybe on a different planet. But you just don't know what you don't know. And so it's like, yeah, 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 busy mind. Uh-huh. Yeah. Mhm. But guess what? I didn't know because I found out through a friend of mine who surprisingly, in a surprised manner, explained to me that people actually think in thoughts with words. I said, "You mean in words? People have words in their minds?" He said, "Yeah, don't you?" I said, "You mean like sentences?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Like conversations?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "You're kidding me." I had no idea because I was not born that way. And I mean, that could be seen as some kind of weird thing or not.
No,
It's
no, actually, it's not. There are those categories like that of people that are more sensing, and like even Myers-Briggs personality test. They talk about introverts, outside thinkers, sensors, and that
good. Okay,
in
so
categories.
good.
Yeah,
I've fit in a category. That's good. So
yeah.
just joking. But yeah, anyway, so what I'm saying here is that it was a natural kind of evolution for me to just be a body type, and
Mhm.
and still there was a mind awakening to itself.
Yeah.
Even, there was still that. But yeah,
Yeah, whereas I've been encouraged to do the other way around, to be more in the body and not so all up here.
yeah, right. Kind of just like like a water going down into the earth through the strata, just sifting down process to be all the way. We need to all the way be here, all the way. And then when there's awakening, when there's that is saturating, it wants to, in my experience, it wants to know everything as that through and through and through and through. And then, of course, if it knows it here, it knows it everywhere, right? It sees
Yeah.
it everywhere. It knows Mother Earth is that, and everything is that.
But it's neat because that kind of explains a big part of why that distinctive experience, and for part of what you've been talking about too.
Yeah, well, and the variety, of course, just the variety. I mean, it may well be that initial shift, and I believe Susanna, you've referred to it as mind awakening, um, because it really tends to be sort of in the head. I mean, that's the head, heart, gut.
Yeah. It's awareness
Uh,
recognizes
yeah,
itself. It
exactly
sees
so. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
So
there's the kind of this thing where we have this narrative self, you might call it, where we have this kind of story that, my name is David and this is what I do for a living and this is where I live and all this kind of narrative stuff, and we think that's who we are.
yeah.
And when that breaks, then, at the time I talked about it as like the center shattered and there's kind of this shrapnel of self-concepts that are kind of floating around, and they come up in our awareness when we have certain experiences or whatever triggers an old self-concept, and we see it, and it's like, okay, well, this isn't really true, and we throw it away and kind of go through this
Right.
assembly of the narrative self.
Exactly. Exactly.
yeah, and that can sometimes be, fairly clear. I mean, I remember thinking that, everything was kind of centered here. I think most people would. The eye sense is centered kind of right behind the eyes and that sort of thing. And the energy flow going forward was such that there was a definite movement in the body even before the initial awakening, but such that the seeing, even though there's this sort of periscope that sees through here, that the seeing is with the entire body, centered somewhat on the heart abdomen area, but it's very much from the as far as the physical and subtle bodies are concerned, a much more universal sort of experience and more universal senses. And yet I'm still like you, David. It's sort of still very left brain oriented, and so the waking up embodiment integration well, it's fascinating from the sort of intellectual review of things point of view. As that goes along, to see all these things that we're, in my case, just really not particularly aware of, or at least not in the same way, until
Hmm.
recent times.
Yeah, it's interesting that I kind of wondered about it when I kind of realized what mind was as a field. I kind of realized it was, surrounded the whole body.
Yeah.
So what was this thing about the head? And I realized it's because most of the senses are concentrated there except touch. And so
Hmm.
the mind is identified with the sensory content. And so we kind of locate ourselves there. That's if we're mind identified. Some people are more body identified or emotionally identified, whatever. It kind of depends on our style.
Well, in Zen, they say waking up, like that's big mind. So you wake up to big mind, which is
Right.
the unconditional mind, the
Yeah.
mind that is in awareness of itself and isn't conditional. So that conditional mind, right? It wakes up. It has it that which is unconditioned is awoken to, and then it supports that conditioned mind knowing itself as that, right? And deconstructing anything that doesn't believe that took itself to be that, to be separate. And then, as you say, then really the whole being is then known as the unconditioned, the awareness.
Yeah.
Awareness isn't just located here, is my point.
Yeah.
Awareness is includes the all of yourself, all of this awareness. But that awareness of it being kind of like a void in experientially is, in my mind, it was big mind. Big mind was
Yeah.
aware of itself as being the vastness.
Yeah.
And then awareness was known in the heart as oneness and unconditional love and just
And
and then it
compassion.
went into the unity piece.
Yeah.
And then body for me has its own awakening. Body has its own understanding that it is made of that as well. And that took place for me during the unity period. And then finally body had the release of even knowing itself as anything, because it became integrated as the fluidity of reality into the fluidity of reality, which is, you know, I
Yeah,
don't know.
it's interesting too. It's worth noting about the difference between body and mind in a broader sense too, because when the mind is always projecting into the future or referring to memories of the past and playing the past and future, whereas the body is in the present moment. So, for example, if we have some imagination of some possible future threat, the body experiences that as now and responds accordingly. And then the mind sees, oh, the body's afraid, so it reinforces it and kind of goes in this looping thing. But to be in the body, we have to actually be in the present because the body is always in the present. So if we're not in the present, then we're not really in the body.
And the present, for me, includes is it's so because past, present, future is kind of like a continuum, they say. And
Yes,
so I can feel how the present is including the past. It's
right.
including all the information and conditioning and wiring and, just like my dog, she has fear in her body based on the past, but she's in the present moment, like all the
Right.
time.
Yes.
So that's just brought into the present is this rich conglomerate of timelines is all a drop of now. And people say, oh, don't be in the past. Well, if you're experiencing something in the present, it's now,
Yes.
including even if it's something flavored you from the past that you're feeling,
Yes.
it's now.
That's a good point. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember I did an article about this that I stopped and I looked about time and realized there was kind of 8 different ways we experience time. And it just kind of depends on our relationship with it as to how we're experiencing it. It's kind of
There's so much to this.
yeah.
So, so kind of wrapping up, what do you, is there something that John, that you feel like
Well, I
any
think that
lingering things?
we've probably have covered the sorts of things that we were talking about before. I think that if both of you, having a perspective now of speaking of the past, looking back a few years and thinking about it from this point in time, it'd be interesting to go back and, for example, look at maybe not the whole thing, but just look at pieces of your conversation with Adyashanti from 8 years ago, even again after this, and just to see how that sort of sits. Or, I mean, I might go back and look at your respective individual back gap interviews, just to see how how that was coming out. Certainly, I think we can all say that the perspective, is very, very different. And I'll just add, I actually also, Susanna, just yesterday took a look at the conversation you had with Renata McNay, and that was
Yeah.
about 6 years ago. So that would have been 2+ years after the conversation with Anya
Beyond
Shanti.
unity, yeah.
Yeah,
Beyond
you would certainly. Well, this was 2 years later, so it's still, well into,
unity.
in fact, 2 years plus of post the no self shift, and so
Yeah.
you had time to integrate and
Yeah.
process that, and the way that you described it, even then, was considerably different.
Then now?
Yeah, well, but then 2 years before that, and now I
Oh,
suspect that we'd all say very different from then, and it just keeps going, keeps getting better.
well, yeah, it just you get used to things.
Yeah,
You get used to living in a way, and the functioning is then seamless with the shift, right? It becomes seamless, and then there's yeah, things changed for me for sure from from before the what took place with that falling away of the self to that degree, the no self, the unity, falling away of unity, to integrating it, that long period of integrating it, to now fully integrated. But there's something that is exactly the same, and that is just that the self-reflection is just not there. And so life is just really different. It's just so different from the other phases of my time, of my journey. There's just and of course every one of those shifts life was so different, but
Yeah. And
I don't know.
we
It
both had major health challenges period too that
for
definitely
sure.
created a whole different kind of focus of our attention for a while.
Yeah, and even then, some people asked me because I was in that car accident with lots of broken bones and all that, you guys know. Um, and a lot of health issues, pneumonia and all this stuff from that accident. They asked me, how was awakening for you during that time? Or did it support you? Or did it go away? Or did anything? I'm like, no, nothing, nothing changed. There was zero, zero, zero difference, so much that it wasn't even there was no thought about it. It's just the doors of whatever pure experiencing have opened, and it remained so. You just can't hide. You
yeah,
just can't
for
hide.
sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you, David, you went through your health issues,
Yeah,
and
yeah. It was interesting. I went through kind of what I called my zombie phase because the combination of treatment side effects and stuff were um, I wasn't sleeping properly. And so it was still there. There was never any loss,
mm,
but I was nowhere near as clear. But it was interesting because when I interacted with friends, they
mm,
felt the presence there actually gradually getting stronger,
mm,
where even if it wasn't entirely conscious for me, uh, it was obvious for others.
mm.
Thought that was interesting.
It certainly points up the transmission that happens, even when one isn't really particularly thinking about that. I mean, the transmission here, that's happening just in this conversation is sit back and get quiet about it for a moment. Just awesome. Um,
Mm.
and so I think maybe on that note, since we're about at the time that we talked about, that we should.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't mean to rush us. It's just as you both know, I have some more to be. So yeah,
Right, right,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. Well, if the enthusiasm is there and so forth, we can maybe do this again, or some different
right.
configuration. Who knows?
Yeah.
But it's
Thank you again for holding space for this and your
oh,
participation as well, which I think is very useful for people as well.
that's
They may
Yes.
find themselves
yeah,
somewhere in this mix.
yeah,
That's the whole point of this is like support for
Yeah.
people. to wherever you are at. Perhaps that something in here has been useful.
Yeah, I hope so. That's certainly it's a great feeling, and it's certainly my pleasure and a great privilege. So I thank both of you very much for this too.
Yeah. Thank you,
Yeah.
David, for joining in too, all of us.
Well, thank you.